Well, my name is Sharon Dunn. I live in Western Massachusetts in the small town of Leverett. Um, I retired from a family business in 2010, and I've taken up a career writing. I have two books of poetry and a memoir that I published last May. And I became involved with Hands Across the Hills as it started up as a branching out of the Leverett Alliance after the 2016 election, when so many of us were very upset. Paul and I both have just finished a week ago today. We were in a coal mine in Kentucky.
That's right, at this time.
That's right. So this has been a grassroots effort, and it's really the first one that I've participated in my life.
All right. So thank you, Sharon, and welcome. So Paula, I want to start off with you. I guess where I want to begin the conversation is you co-founded with others in your community, Hands Across the Hills. Can you tell us why? What motivated you? You've done a lot of different things in your life in the peacemaking area. What motivated you to do this particular project?
The election, what else?
Okay, simple, yeah.
That's the short story. The longer story is that about 25 years ago, I founded an NGO called Karuna Center for Peace Building. So now we have Rita Karuna.
Yay.
I chose that name because I was doing this out of the compassion I felt for the issues of war and the consequent suffering. I've also been a professor at the School for International Training in Brattleboro, Vermont, running a master's degree program in peace and conflict studies and an international training institute called CONTACT, which stands for Conflict Transformation Across Cultures. So I've had a tremendous amount of experience worldwide of working with groups across divides. And I've probably worked in 25 or 35 different countries around the world, mostly post-war, sometimes pre-war, to work with groups of people who come to the table to reach out across the divides. And after the election, it got very clear to me that I needed to bring this work home. That, as everybody has said in their questions, the divides across this country have become dangerous, and the gap seems to widen from day to day and month to month. And the idea of this came up at a community meeting that a few friends and I called right after the election. And a group of us decided we wanted to work on bridging divides. We didn't know where the divides would come from, where we would wind ourselves up to be, but we had the idea that we needed to bridge divides with conservative voters. Our town is just outside of Amherst, Mass. It's very progressive, and we were about 90% for Hillary. When we wound up in Eastern Kentucky with a town that's about 90% for Trump. So it was a very good match.
So how did you find that particular town in Kentucky to connect with?
Sharon, why don't you do that one?
Yeah, one of our members is a real news hound and a tremendous reader, and he had read an article on BillMoyers.com written by a young man named Ben Fink, who is director of this place in Whitesburg, Kentucky called Apple Shop. Ben was writing about his reaction to the November 2016 election, with himself being from Connecticut, having a Jewish background, and being very, very liberal himself and progressive, and finding himself in this community where the gunshots were going off of celebration for the victory of Mr. Trump. And at the end, Ben described in his article the kind of outreach and community development they were doing in this very impoverished coal country in Eastern Kentucky. And at the end of the article, he reached out and he said, we would like to connect with people that are different from us. And our Hands Across the Hills member, Jay Frost, wrote him immediately, and it began right away, developing our plans to get together.
So, I'm curious, Ben Fink, a Jewish guy from Kentucky down in coal country, how does he earn the trust of the community down there, which he obviously has?
Well, that's a nice story. He's a Jewish guy from Connecticut. He comes from Hartford, and he's got a PhD in cultural studies from the University of Minnesota. and was en route to an academic career when he realized he just wanted to be a community organizer, kind of like the Obama model. And he looked around for a job in community organizing, and he found a job at this organization called Apple Shop, which was started in the 1960s when the war on poverty was discovering Appalachia, which they call Appalachia, actually. And so that organization started out as an economic and social development organization, still exists, and they hired Ben, who has been doing community organizing there. He had no idea if he'd be accepted. He was the first Jew that many of them ever met. Still never met a Muslim, and I wish that would happen soon too, because they need to deal with that stereotype. But they didn't know any Jews, and he introduced himself very boldly as a Jewish radical Marxist community organizer. He thought he got the whole truth, because all they can do is shoot me. But if I'm dishonest, I won't get any place with them. And he's a charming, very bright, charismatic young man, and he's been accepted by many of the people there. Certainly not all, but many of the people there. And he's doing really good community organizing.
So I've just got one or two more questions, and I'm going to turn it over to the group. But I'm curious, you both have come back from a trip down there where you were there for several days and had a variety of conversations. I'd like to ask each of you, what was most surprising to you on this trip?
Go on,
I'll say that for me, our friends in Kentucky really had organized our time so that we were introduced to a number of their community centers and their community activities. And I was really deeply impressed by how devoted to community development the folks down there are. We went to the Hemphill Community Center for an evening dinner and dancing to bluegrass music. We went to a Culture Hub celebration, which was a gathering where they were celebrating 22 partners in their network of organizations that are really trying to work together to work on their economy down there with the ideas for jobs and for new industries. It was, and the church, they had a church do a dinner for us one evening. So we had so many opportunities to meet all different kinds of people, and the power of their, I think it's a beginning of developing their own communities, really impressed me.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Paula, what was most surprising for you?
The depth of our relationship with the people who had come here in October. How quickly we were able to pick up our concerns for each other, our affection for each other, and how deeply we were able to develop that even further and have dialogues that I felt were even more intense because we had built the container 6 months ago. The container was strong enough so that we could dive back in and increase the bonds between us. And the fact that some of the people in the group were Trump voters and we are so desperately unhappy about what's happening in our country, the fact that we're able to hold those bonds across that difference is remarkable to me. And we are. We're doing.
I think I would like to say that the heart of our whole project was really the dialogues that Paula facilitated. We had probably 6 hours of dialogue altogether on the Kentuckians' October 2017 visit to us in Leverett. And we had another almost six hours of intense dialogue in a very kind of safe, private environment with wonderful prompts by Paula that opened up discussion. And I also want to say that somebody earlier asked, as we were all being introduced, what is a way you can connect with people in a kind of fundamental way? And I think Paula, for the very first dialogue that we did in October, she organized us into an arts project ahead of time that had to do with where our families are from. That meant for many of us in Leverett, immigration stories, and for the folks in Kentucky, their lives and family had to do with coal mining and very, very really almost no understanding of where their immigration history was from. However, and when we first got in our first dialogue circle with Paula, all of us together, speaking about family, telling stories about family, opened up our discussion amazingly.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's open it up for questions from the group. Stuart, since you're going to have to leave early, as maybe, I want to ask you, if there's anything you would like to ask them at this time.
Well, thanks, Aryeh. I guess my question is, from the learnings that you've had, and this was a good illustration talking about family and so forth, but what were the key ingredients to getting people initially to open up and listen, to put aside all that emotional baggage that we tend to carry with us? And what I have found, that's the challenge, is getting people just for a moment to step back and say, I'm not going to get into attack mode or defensive mode, but be open to listen and have some kind of normalized dialogue. So I was curious what your key learnings were from that.
Well, I'm a dialogue facilitator, and I've been doing this around the world for many decades. And I understand that my task is to build a safe container. And I work on that assiduously and carefully. We work with agreements on what is allowed and not allowed in the dialogue. I work with introductions and little dyads and triads to get people to feel comfortable. And I'm constantly building the container to make it safe. And I take a very active role in ensuring that that happens. And when that is not happening because someone's asking a kind of political attack question, I redirect people back. And I'm a traffic cop. And you can't have traffic without a traffic cop. And it has to be very reassuring for people, because the tendency is to hide in a situation that feels dangerous, as this might feel dangerous. But if the safer the container is, the more people will respond. And I also always begin with easier rather than more difficult topics. So I began with family stories, because we all have family stories. Now, family stories are not easy, but family stories are something we have in common. And I saved the politics for later on. We got to Trump and guns and immigration and all the push button issues, but we certainly didn't start there. If you start with the hard things, you never get to the easy things, because you break up. But if you start with where the common ground is, you can slowly build a trust within the group. And that's what happens.
Thank you.
This is a good place. I wanted to share this. There's Paula, you've told me there's several write-ups. There's one that I saw on your website this morning that had the following. There's one of the people from the Kentucky group, Kendall Eisen. So here's what it says. He told a combined group session, pointing to different levels with his extended right hand, I wondered, what is the intent of the Massachusetts people? Were they going to look down on us and try to bring us up by the hair of our head? Or were they just going to do a study of us and rural Appalachia? We've been studied since '64. I don't understand why so many experts come in and we're not able to really make our economy grow. Why can't they teach us how to make our economy grow and be successful like you folks in Massachusetts? And then in the article, Sharon, you answer, we came because we wanted to talk with people face to face and talk with them and really get to know them. We didn't come to study or do any kind of elevating. We thought of many ways we might be able to partner, but the basic idea was that we really wanted to understand more about your lives. Yeah. Other questions? Wendy, yeah.
Just listening to this, I'm struck with, is there a way that you can connect in asking them about their own wisdom? That, we have something to learn from their life experiences and their talents. I mean, they can do things that God knows I can't do. And is there a way and did that happen in terms of, well, we'd like to learn from you and your wisdom in what you're doing?
One of the things that we experienced when we were there were we met with we had two different theater experiences. One was a staged 5-character reading of a play called The Future of Letcher County. And that play was constructed out of stories that were told by people in Letcher County, and a dramaturg put them all together. And we were really impressed with that. And later on, we met with another theater group called Higher Ground. And they've been doing the same thing, this kind of oral history, and putting together, they put together a musical called Opioids, the musical. And because they have a huge opioid problem in Kentucky, as many communities do, including Leverett. And we thought to ourselves, this is amazing. Maybe we can learn something. We can maybe have this theater troupe come up to Leverett and do a residency. We need to learn to do this kind of storytelling. And so that was one major takeaway for me.
Thank you. Libby.
What you referred to was something that I was thinking about from the get-go, thinking about Sharon and Paula and their degrees and their years of working with other people and their professionalism, and then going into a place that you would call hillbillies, I guess, where they are so uneducated in many senses. And, the difference between the two cultures is so stark. I wondered in the beginning, as you did introduce yourselves, and you kind of answered this a little bit, talking about degrees, and did you manage to park those things at the door, or was that sort of included in the overall introduction so that there was a feeling of equality in the room, as all being human beings rather than somebody's more educated or richer or more famous than the other? And I could feel the struggle in having everybody feel comfortable enough to really share. That's one thing. And then I would like to ask a follow-on question is, based on what Wendy asked, what did you learn from the people in the mountains in Kentucky that would change your own personal lives as you go back home?
I want to respond to the first question, which is so deep that I'll save the second one for later, because the first one is very important. The most delicate issue we had were the class divides. We live in an academic community. I would say a good bunch of our 14, 16 people have doctorates or equivalent degrees. We're highly professional. We're academically successful. We're financially relatively successful. We live very comfortable, safe lives in a gorgeous community in an academic environment. And our people in Kentucky have extremely different lives. And when we got there, we really could see for ourselves just how different they were. And they feel easily patronized and easily hurt because the hillbilly label, the redneck label, the war on poverty, people coming down to take their pictures in the 60s when Bobby Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson went down, and the reporters and the books with all the poverty pictures, they're so sensitive to that. Mm-hmm. And we knew some of that the first round, and we learned much more of that the second round. We didn't walk around taking pictures like that because we know what it means for them. They have felt abused. And when Aryeh read that quote from Kendall Ison, that's exactly what it was. It was about, are you here to examine us? Are you just here to throw us away because we're trash? So we were incredibly respectful. We did our best to put our degrees as far away in our pockets as we could, but we are very different people. We speak differently. We have different ways of being because of our educations and our privilege. So we couldn't hide those. They also stayed in our homes. We had homestays, which I designed as a very important part of how we get to know each other, because staying in someone's home was a very intimate act. Our homes are lovely. Their homes are not so lovely. They saw immediately that we were of a different class than they were. And we didn't talk about class in the first set of dialogues, but when we went to Kentucky, we finally did. It felt like Trump was one elephant in the room and class was another elephant in the room. And we talked about it and acknowledged it, but we have been super careful not to flaunt any of our educational privileges or economic privileges any more than we had to. We just wanted to be totally respectful to who they are and to level the playing field in every way possible.
It also turned out that among the Kentuckians that were in the group that came up to visit us, there were really people that did have education and that have accomplishments. And especially the women, I felt, were very powerful. They're community leaders. Although there is, I do believe, as Paula says, there is a class difference. We certainly, the whole idea of these folks being hillbillies just disintegrated as we work together.
Yeah. I think one thing to remember when we do this kind of work, and you all know this because you do related work, is that the people who show up are not the extremes. The people who show up are those people who in some way are ready to be engaged. And so you don't get the outer fringes of people. You get people who are generally a little bit more educated, certainly a little bit more open. So we had that, but Libby's question is very important because that was a major conversation for us. We talked about it among ourselves in our own Leverett group meetings. We talk constantly about how are we going to present ourselves? How are we going to deal with these issues? What are we going to say? One story is they drove here and we flew there. And we almost didn't want to fly there because we knew the optics would be so awful. But we didn't want to sit in a car for 15 hours either, as they did, because they had to and we had a choice. And by the time we decided to fly there, we thought, well, they've seen our houses anyway, so who are we fooling? And we did fly. But these are the kind of differences.
I have a quick question about the use of the term hillbilly. You know, I read J.D. Vance's book, A Hillbilly Elegy, about his life in Kentucky. And the way he uses it there, it's not a put down. It's a very fond identity that he holds on to for himself and his family. I'm just kind of curious, is hillbilly a put down? Is it not a put down? When is it okay? When is it not okay to use the term hillbilly?
It is a put down. And Ben Fink and everybody else in the region that we met wants nothing to do with Vance. They feel he's exploitive.
Really? So, they don't like Vance. Uh-huh.
There are half a dozen other books I can recommend to you because we read everything on Appalachia that we possibly could in the past 6 months. We've been educating ourselves hard before they arrived here in Leverett. And he's considered an outsider. He was not raised there. He was raised in Ohio. Well, his relatives came from there. He's a conservative and he's politically ambitious, and they don't like him. So read some other books. They don't like the word hillbilly at all. We would never think of using it. It's a derogatory word to them.
Good answer. Thank you. Okay, who has the next question?
Well, I had asked you earlier, what is the deep place that you come from that allows you to not just live by your intellect, but go to the heart and deeper?
Can't do this work from the head. This is hard work. This dialogue work is absolutely hard work. And coming from your head, you might as well be in your class doing a lecture. That's not what this is about. This is all about being vulnerable and being transparent and leading with your karuna, your compassion, your heartfelt empathy for the human condition. And it's completely hard work. And nothing allows it. The work is hard work. It doesn't have to be allowed. It's just what is. And any other way to do dialogue I don't think is successful.
So why begin at the heart? What's the difference?
Because I want to reach people in order to find where we can soften toward each other, where we can see each other in our full humanity, beyond the stereotypes. And that's a heart process. that absolutely is not an intellectual process. It doesn't, you know that as well as I do. We don't shift in our head. We shift in our hearts. And it's completely the way that one has to be in the kind of social change that we're going for, which is really deep change of attitudes and behaviors.
Mm.
Karuna, yeah. Unmute yourself there. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so actually that's what I was wondering, what sort of change happened on your side, but particularly I'm curious with the others, Trump supporters, what sort of change or transformation, any specific stories you could tell that would give us a feel for that?
Well, one of the things that we learned was that sometimes the Trump vote was much more complicated than we could imagine. There was one woman, Gwen, who said that she always wanted to vote for a woman if a woman was running for president. Many of her family were coal miners, and she said, "I've got coal dust in my blood," and that she felt coming out of the voting booth after voting for Trump, she felt dirty, but that she had to do it to be in solidarity with her community. Because what had happened down in coal country is that the media down there, and the media that they listened to, had taken a soundbite out of what Hillary Clinton said, and what they heard was, coal mines are going to close and coal miners are going to be out of work. So the vote went to Trump.
Yeah, I can add a few more things to that. Part of your question is how we changed. And that's essential, because if we're just trying to make someone else change and we're not in the game, that's not a fair game. I think we changed because we dropped our stereotypes. I could feel my heart soften from the first day they were here. Something happened to me in those exchanges, both in Leverett and then in Letcher County, Kentucky, that was very profound, and that wound up for me having the capacity to be with them beyond politics. That I really came to see them as human beings, and the rage that I have felt toward Trump voters wasn't there.
Yeah.
In that context. There was something else that was going on that was bigger than the voting. That's one way that I changed. I want to tell you a story about the way someone else is open to change. One of the people in the group said, the question was about Trump and some good things that he has done, and she said, "Isn't it wonderful that he wants to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem? Isn't that a good thing?" And I gasped. I thought, I'm facilitating. I shouldn't be the one to jump on her. But I've been working there for 25 years, and I have very strong feelings about that issue, as most of us do. And of course, people took it right on and not yelled at her, but tried to share. And I talked to her afterwards and told her about my feelings, and she said, "Educate me." That was so beautiful to me. This is a human being who was open. We asked her where she learned that, and she said from the Bible and the church. Chosen people, blah, blah, blah. They're fundamentalists. And so they have literal interpretations of the Bible. And I spoke to her about other sources of knowledge besides the Bible, etc. And her response of "educate me" said a lot to me, because that's how change happens.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Could I just add to what Paula, you just said? She said, "Educate me," because she was in a place where she knew you, trusted you,
That's
and
right.
was open to you
That's right.
helping to educate her. Otherwise, she would have never heard you.
And people in our community kept saying, "Did you change their votes?" Because these people still support Trump. And we know that if you're going there to try to change somebody else at that level, you might as well stay home, because that's not what it's about.
I've got a question. I want to ask the two of you. Some of us who are here in this conversation, and other friends in the Bay Area, we kind of have the conversation. Well, we know that America isn't going to be right until people on all sides of the political divide learn how to reconnect and see ourselves as one country again. And yet, how to do it? Other than, have a nice young Jewish man sort of planted in Trump country. If some of us here in the Bay Area wanted to do something similar to what all of you have done in Massachusetts, how would we get started? What would your recommendation be if we want to engage in dialogue across the hills?
Well, what we learned is we had to find a conduit, and we tried to find a conduit in our local hills. We have lots of blue-collar towns around us where people voted for Trump, and we tried very hard in the first months after we got the idea of doing a Bridging Divides project to find people in the local area. They didn't want to talk to us. We tried through ministers, we tried through social workers, we tried a number of connections in some of the towns around us with a lot of shut down factories and unemployed people, and we didn't have the right conduit. And when we found Ben, we discovered how important that right conduit is, how much it matters. The communities that I tried in, finally, this week I got an email saying, let's do something. Somebody in the community wrote back to me and said, I think maybe we can begin this. So after a year of probing around in some of these local communities, I finally have, I think, a conduit into one of them. But it would take you time in the Bay Area to find the communities that voted for Trump and to establish a channel into them who's trusted by their community. Because otherwise, there's no way to do the recruiting. I did hear a program in Seattle. We've been tracking what's going on nationally because we're very interested in this. And one of the first programs we found was people from Seattle who reached out to Eastern Washington, which is very conservative, farm country there. And they've been doing some exchanges. And you can probably Google that and see what they've done. So they found a way. They made a contact someplace in Eastern Washington and have established some sort of dialogue program. And it's happening in many other parts of the country. People are doing it. They're reaching out as a challenge.
Thank you. We're gonna switch in a moment to you asking us a question to reflect on, for each of us to reflect on. But before that, is there anybody else who has another question for Paula and Sharon? Yeah, Wendy.
I have two questions. One is, looks like one way people connect with people from other political points of view is within their own families. And, you hear about what to say over Thanksgiving or,
yes.
other than not talking about politics at all, which is what we do in my family, just don't go there, talk about the kids and this kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Any suggestions for doing this within families? Because that's one jumping off place we can do. The other thing is, just reading an article in the Times today, New York Times today, was talking about people who Trump voters who are willing to believe the lies that he tells. How do you work with people who, and who are, you want to come from a place of heart and a place of truth, but also with people who really want to believe lies? So those are my two questions.
I'd like to jump in about the first question about inside the family. There was one story among our group. There was a Kentuckian woman she came up here. She was actually a liberal, and her beloved older brother is a staunch Trump supporter. He's a former coal mining boss. And she was very troubled about this relationship within her family. And so she went through the whole dialogue process with us. And she reported when we went down there to Kentucky that some of what she learned in the process of speaking with us, she applied to speaking with her brother, her older brother, and that had moved them closer. And she felt very grateful for that. And I guess I would like to just, on our website, which is handsacrossthehills.org, in our resources section, we have a number of resources there, some of them that Paula has used for years and provided to us. So there's a start there. There's also a book that Paula recommended, which I have right here. It's called The Little Book of Dialogue for Difficult Subjects. And maybe that could be useful as well.
So I want to respond to Wendy's second question, which is about people believing lies. They don't think they're lies.
Me to ask, by the way.
What?
That was a hard question for me to
Yeah,
ask.
but they don't think they're lies. That's what they believe. Now, partly their only media is Fox News.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big handicap. Sometimes I get up in the morning and I listen to NPR or I open the Times and there's something horrific that's happened. And I wish that my Kentucky colleagues understood what I understood about whatever it was that just happened. And I know they won't, because they won't have the same sources of information. This is a region that doesn't have broadband. People do not have computers in their homes.
Oh, wow.
Televisions, and it's Fox News. And that's all it is. And every public place we went into, like cafes, it's Fox News that's on the big screen. So there's not lies to them. It's their truth. And that's more difficult.